Now, I'm coming to the critical part of this lecture. Among the Panthers, among the NAACP, the Urban League, and Maulana Karenga's group called Us on the West Coast, and among the Nation of Islam, there were agents of the FBI. And you know what? They're among us today. They say, Assalamu alaikum. They never kind of get it right. The death agents, they get it real right. Because their aim is to get up in the mosque and get into the secretariat department where the facts and the figures are. Their aim is to get into positions of leadership. And their aim is to watch the leaders for any weaknesses, so that they can bring about tensions and disruption in organization. Because the white man don't want to see black folk organized. Well, you know the J. Edgar Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover, you know, J. Edgar. He had plants everywhere. J. Edgar Hoover hated Martin Luther King, and J. Edgar Hoover hated Malcolm X, Kwame Ture, or Stokely Carmichael. He hated the civil rights movement. And while Martin Luther King and the big six in civil rights were sitting in Washington with Lyndon Baines Johnson, and even with John Kennedy, they were planning the death of Martin Luther King Jr. Justice sat at my table. We had coffee together. I said, Reverend Jackson, you're in some very powerful circles, and I know you hear a lot of things. And I'm sure they're telling you things about how they're going to move on Farrakhan. I said, but I just want to remind you, my dear brother, that while they were talking about moving on Malcolm and Elijah, they were already planning the death of Martin Luther King. I said, they don't trust you, Jesse. I said, no matter how close you get, Reverend Jackson, they know they can't trust you because there's too much God in you. You'll only go so far, and then the God in you will yank you back. So I said, they will never give you what you think you deserve. My words are proved true. Malcolm, our great spokesman, in 1963 was beating the dickens out of John Kennedy. John Fitzgerald, Malcolm called him John the Fox. Because the liberals had gotten control of the black struggle. And guess what? 30 years ago, Malcolm was the #1 anti-Semite, according to the Anti-Defamation League, in the black struggle. Wait now, you didn't hear me, did you? I'm going to say that again. 30 years ago, Malcolm X, according to the Anti-Defamation League and the dossiers that they put out on Malcolm, was the #1 anti-Semite among black people. And you know why they called him anti-Semitic? Because it was Malcolm X who exposed the liberal Jewish conspiracy behind the civil rights movement. Do you know who the first person was to bring to us the protocols of the learned elders of Zion? Fact or fiction, whatever it is, Malcolm brought it to us. And do you know who the first person was to expose that the real leader of the NAACP was a Jew? It was Malcolm X. And the real leader of the NAACP, you know they had blacks out front, it was Spingarn. And the real leader, core and SNCC in the civil rights movement, they were Jews. Now why did the Jews hook up with you? I mean, this is not anti-Semitism, this is just fact. Why did the Jews hook up with you? Why aren't they hooked up with you too tough today? Because the purpose was accomplished. They got with you because you were discriminated against, right? So were Jews. So it was a natural alliance. They picketed with you, but their motive was different. We're going back to the intent now. Why did they picket? Because they knew once you broke the doors down, you weren't in a position to take advantage of it, but they were. So when the doors were broken down in the civil rights movement, the Jews walked in, took over Miami Beach. Talk to me. Jews got more political power, more economic power as a result of the civil rights struggle. Gays came to prominence, women came to prominence, and blacks are still singing, "We shall overcome." Is that right? Don't be mad with me. Don't be angry. That's not anti-Semitic. I don't hate Jews. I just know the truth. But now, Malcolm was busting the civil rights movement. Malcolm was knocking Dr. King. Because Elijah Muhammad, his teacher, was knocking Dr. King. What? Yes. Elijah Muhammad looked at Martin Luther King as one of the #1 magicians of Pharaoh. What? Wait, let's not get emotional. Please, sisters, don't get angry. Martin Luther King was a PhD in theology. If you know anything about the prophecies do not talk anything about our integration with Pharaoh. It talks about separation from Pharaoh. So now Malcolm was preaching separation. Elijah was preaching separation. Martin Luther King was preaching, I don't want to be your brother-in-law. I want to be your brother. So you can beat us, we're going to love you. You can drag us, we're going to love you. Because it was scientific nonviolence. So Malcolm was nonviolent, and you not either. Well, if nonviolence as a philosophy would work, we need to start preaching it immediately in the black community. Because we sure need to be nonviolent in the way we're killing, maiming, robbing, raping, and destroying one another. That's where you need to practice nonviolence. But when you're going to be nonviolent to an enemy who is persecuting you. See, but what Martin Luther King was doing, he was taking young men and women and marching into places where he wanted us to be able to sit down. But Elijah Muhammad said, don't go where you're not wanted. If they don't want you in their restaurant, why bother? Get on the south side and build some just as beautiful as they got on the north side and go to your own restaurant and spend your money with your own. Now you may say that Elijah Muhammad was wrong, but the moment we could go to the white man's restaurant, all our black restaurants closed down. The moment we could sleep in the white man's hotel, what happened to our hotels and our motels? Did they close down? What happened to black economics? It nearly died in the South because integration put the money in the white man's pocket and took it out of the black man's pocket. Talk to me. Malcolm saw this. Malcolm never was an integrationist. Malcolm never died an integrationist. That's a lie. Malcolm was a realist. But as Malcolm was reaching the public on the outside another dynamic was taking place on the inside of the nation. And what was that? Envy. Jealousy. Because Malcolm was getting headlines while some of the other ministers weren't getting anything. Some of the top laborers in the nation were jealous of Malcolm because he had the attention and the affection of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and they didn't like it. So any little evil report they could bring on Malcolm, they would do it. Like, you can see this in every organization, right? I didn't think that would take place in the nation of Islam. So wait a minute. We're the same as you. Elijah Muhammad didn't wave any magic wand and all of a sudden we became saints. It's a process. And while we're in the process of becoming, we act out some crazy drama. So Elijah Muhammad sat back and would say little words to direct the jealousy toward Malcolm, and then watch Malcolm to see how Malcolm reacted. Malcolm would come to Elijah Muhammad and state his case. Elijah Muhammad said, well, don't pay that no attention, brother. Go right on with your work. How do you know this, Farrakhan? Because I walked in Malcolm's shoes. I can tell you a lot about his feet that no man can tell you about. Because I walked in his shoes. Malcolm could not take the enmity and the strife of his own brothers. And he would come to Boston, where he was always accepted. I was a minister there. And he would tell me, I'm just going to quit. I'm not going to go around and try to help no ministers and preach in their mosque. I'm just going to leave it all alone and go back to New York and build New York. I said, well, Minister Malcolm, don't put me in the mosque in Boston out because some others think like that. I don't think like that. He was being worn down. And guess what? In 1963, Imam Warid, the son of Elijah Muhammad, came out of prison. He was sent to prison for not going along with the draft, as you recall. He came out of prison in the winter of 62, I think it was. The winter of 62, wasn't it? And in the winter of 62, I came to Chicago to sit with the Imam, to talk with him. He had just come out. And in his home was an apartment here on the south side. The present Imam Warid Muhammad asked me if I would go and tell Malcolm that he had something that he wanted to tell both Malcolm and myself, but he wanted to tell us both together. So he asked me would I tell Malcolm that he, Wallace D. Muhammad, wanted to see Malcolm and myself. I called Malcolm and told him what Wallace D. Muhammad had asked. Malcolm was the kind of man, he don't want to hear nothing if it's important with his student, meaning myself. So Malcolm went by himself to Chicago and met with Imam Warid Muhammad, who was then Wallace D. Muhammad, who had just come out of prison and learned that his father had taken wives from among the secretaries. When Wallace D. Muhammad told that to Malcolm X, Malcolm, I guess, was blown, but he understood it from the Quran, he understood it from the Bible, but the hurting thing. Do you remember the sisters that spoke last week? How many of you were present? You know the first sister that spoke? Sister Evelyn? Malcolm was in love with her. when she was growing up in Boston. She became a Muslim in Boston, and Malcolm was teaching in Boston. And they were to marry. And Malcolm at that time was organizing mosques for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and he didn't want to marry at that time. Sister Evelyn came to Chicago and became a secretary of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and unknown to Malcolm, she became a wife. And she produced a child which you saw last week, that gorgeous, beautiful daughter of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Well, you may say, well, why, if it was why was it a secret? Why didn't you all tell the believers? They would have understood. Yeah? Would you really? I've been working with you now for nearly 40 years. I think I knew a little something about black people.